I'd like to give you a high-level overview of this particular white paper on transforming Canada into a global centre for medical device innovation and adoption. And I know that sounds lofty, but given the buzz and the energy and some of the very important discussion we've had today and will continue to have this afternoon and tomorrow, I think this is a very achievable goal. So very briefly, let's talk about the scope of Canada's industry, and I realize I'm probably speaking to the group that knows this better than anybody, but generally, what are medical devices? For those of in the audience that may not have thought about this, this is an extremely diverse group of devices. This could be everything from what seems like a simple wound care system right on through to a robotic surgery instrument that allows surgeons to do some incredible surgery without very invasive approaches to accessing that particular surgical site. It's a major economic driver globally. Medical device sales reached $220 billion worldwide in 2009, and that's particularly compelling given the economic instability many countries around the world experienced in this very, very recent time. In 2008, the global medical device market actually grew faster than the global drug market. So from the perspective of how devices are different than pharma, the potential for Canada to really develop its medical device industry I see as an extremely important one to understand. What's Canada's track record? We've heard a lot about that already this morning, so I'm just going to quickly walk through it, just give you a sense of how we stack up compared to other countries. Generally in Canada, when we looked at the data, Canada has about 998 companies, approximately. Of course, that changes day to day and week to week. But over half of them are actually small to medium. So we have a very diverse group of companies, but over 57% of them employ less than 25 employees. So when we talk about startup companies, that tends to be where Canada is in the sector. If you talk to the larger companies, Neil Fraser's been educating me ever so well, and I'm terribly grateful for that. Canada at one time had many more larger companies, but for a number of reasons, they have left the Canadian market and gone on to pursue others, which I think is something important to think about, and we lay out some ideas around that in the complete paper. Relatively few, 37% of them employ 25 to 49 employees. I think this was earlier mentioned. Only 1% of companies actually employ 100 to 150 and on and so forth. The entire sector employs 26,000 Canadians. If you compare that to other workforces, it's relatively small. How much does it account for our GDP in Canada? 0.14% of our GDP, which is hard to get a sense of. Actually, I apologize, that's a mistake. It should say 0.014%. Compared to the US is 0.16, Ireland 0.4, UK 0.6, Germany 0.7. So we are substantially smaller than many other of our comparator economic countries. What strengths do Canada has to build on? I am an educator, researcher, and clinician who always starts with, okay, what do we have to work with? Rather than looking at what's not happening, I suggest that one of our advantages may be to look at what we have to work with, and I think our earlier panel identified these strengths quite nicely. We have the second most highly educated population in the world, second only to Finland. We are extremely strong in clinical trials capacity. 80% of our tertiary healthcare services in Canada are delivered in academic health sciences centres, which is very unusual relative to a number of other countries. I think in the US it's maybe 5%. Compared to 80% in Canada. That is a substantive strength. There is tremendous knowledge and learning and research capacity in our health sciences centers. Canada has an emerging medtech collaboration. A lot of it we heard about earlier today. We also have substantive expertise in health technology assessment. Dr. Salinka, I think, was here to mention, yes, from Health Technology Exchange. So we're very good at technology assessment, and we have substantive strength in the IT sector. Research in Motion is one of our lovely flags, and yes, they are absolutely pursuing active market share in the health sector. Work with them very directly on creating new softwares to help clinicians take massive amounts of health data and turn it into knowledge. Knowledge becomes the basis for making evidence-based and very important decisions. But when I learned this the hard way, again, learning from what doesn't always go well as a chief nursing officer, I'll never forget it. Budget planning session, I'm sure some of you have been through that. What happens in a hospital? They hand you paper copies of maybe 50 Excel files of a whole bunch of numbers. And the day I looked at them and said, any chance you guys could run me a few regressions just to tell me what matters? And the answer was, well, maybe we could. We need about 10 or 12 weeks to do that. So, and then I said, well, what year was this data from? Well, that was 2006, and the data was from 2001. So I said, okay, let me get this straight. I'm going to make decisions, and I need to make evidence-based decisions because that's what healthcare is about, and as a researcher, that makes sense. But I'm going to make it on data that's 4 years old, and I'm making it on the basis of, at best, a raw number, maybe a percentage or two, and no ability to take knowledge out of that data and make very good decisions. So our IT sector is an extremely important sector, and I'll speak to it again in just a moment. So, what are the challenges that Canada faces in terms of a healthy, developed, and thriving medical device sector? We've heard a lot about some great discussion around research and development. I loved the phrase, "It takes two to tango." I think that came from Dr. Truckenberg this morning. We need to, and I'd like to just, we've talked a lot about these issues, and I don't want to restate them, and some of it's well described in the paper. But a couple of things strike me from this morning's conversation. When we talk about academic partnerships with industry, I think we have to be careful to distinguish what are the issues for individual faculty researchers and faculty teams, and what are the issues that are much more controlled by the university environments in which we work. So it's wonderful to say, and I get this asked all the time, you didn't publish that paper, did you, on the low birth weight study? Well, of course I did. I have to prove I am worthy of tenure, to meet tenure, to maintain my role and my position as a university. And more importantly, I can't get a national research grant unless I have a very detailed CV that identifies my track record. So it's wonderful to say, researchers, for heaven's sakes, don't publish. That's a little like saying to the researcher, especially the young researcher, go ahead and slit your throat in the name of healthcare innovation, which could be 3, 5, 10, or 15 years down the road. So I think there are some very important issues that universities have to grapple with around creating environments for researchers to thrive that fit with the proprietary environment in which health technologies or medical device companies more directly are working in. The other issue is the faculty, the individual faculty members. I was trained as a nurse. All my degrees are in nursing, and I've been over the question mark as to why I'm now in 2 business schools, cross-pointed engineering. I don't recall ever having a class about research from the perspective of how do you know this isn't an innovation that could be applied in your practice as a health clinician. Or if you do come across one of those opportunities, what do you do with it? I'm not sure we're alone as faculty members. As I mentioned earlier, I work with the automotive sector all the time. They were interested in my car seat work not long ago, about 6 months ago, and sat down and they said, let me show you some of the work we're working on. Of course, this was after we signed the NDA. The NDA issue, I love that. I'm one of those researchers, and I apologize to Ted Hewitt if you tell him, I just sign them. I don't even read them. I said, look, we need to talk, we need to collaborate, so I'll sign them and let's see where this goes. So it could be the wrong way to go. I'm the, apologize for making the mistake, but for heaven's sakes, let's just talk and figure out where the opportunities are. So of course, after the 3-second NDA discussion with the, with the company, he said, let me show you this interesting sensor technology. The automotive manufacturers do amazing things with sensors. They've embedded heart rate and breathing sensors in the vehicle's seats for drivers as a strategy for driver fatigue, because of course driver fatigue, when people fall asleep at the wheel, it's almost always a fatal crash. And those fatal crashes are all too often the breadwinner in families, which throw people into poverty and a number of awful outcomes. So he's showing me this seat with his embedded heart rate and sensor technologies, and I looked at him and I said, have you ever thought about the hospital bed technology sort of sector? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, right now, if you're a patient that comes in with a heart issue or a breathing problem, I'm going to hook you up to sticky things on your chest, which are very uncomfortable, and if you happen to sweat, they fall off. Those are going to get attached to a wire, and the wires physically tether you to a machine called an electrocardiographic monitor. Really hard to get up easily and go to a bathroom when you're tired with wires to a wall or to a physical piece of equipment. If you could just lie down in that mattress and be very comfortable, and I had on a wireless handheld device your heart rate and breathing so that I knew exactly when you get into trouble, that would be a great innovation technology. His eyes lit up. And his next question, which you'll all appreciate, is, who do I talk to in the healthcare system? I'd ask you to think about the answer to that question. Like, who would you talk to? Talk to me. Okay, so my next request, off track here, I apologize, but could you leave me your business cards if you want me to forward those people to you? But it just speaks to a great example of there are technologies out there, but we so rarely often think about what's manufacturers of automotive industries or software developers figured out that healthcare could take advantage of. And isn't that also another area for strengthening and building medical device industry? It's okay for automotive companies to learn about how those sensor systems can be wildly important in a healthcare system. And I think healthcare systems and universities and researchers need to think about how we do that. So without spending any more time on stories, I apologize, let me go on. Access to capital, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We've heard about the VC issues, the venture capitalists. That is not there is not a big golden pot of gold sitting at the end of the rainbow waiting for my great idea as a researcher to go and find it and say, you should spend all your money on me. And all the issues that presents, we've talked about this morning. Regulatory processes, I can't leave this one alone. Neil's smiling because we had a wonderful discussion about regulatory. In Canada, if you were to, and many of you have lived this dream, I'm quite sure, when you come up with a new device and it's going into a healthcare system in particular, there are multiple and challenging regulatory processes. There isn't just one challenging process. In fact, there's a different one for every province and likely territory. And it gets worse. It's not only a different process for every province, it would be different if you're talking about just a class 1 or class 2 device. Different again if it's a device that actually delivers a drug, like an insulin pump. And different again if it's got any software in it that's collecting information, analyzing it, for example, like glucometers. So when you're developing these devices and putting them into the market, you're going through 3 fairly independent sets of regulatory hurdles and challenges that are wildly time-consuming. Now put that into the perspective of 57% of our companies in Canada being small. They don't have armies and regulatory departments to navigate these regulatory channels. And so too often, our findings in this paper suggest that small companies just say, oh, forget it. We'll just go to the US market. It's bigger anyway. HIPAA has a much more streamlined process, maybe, and it has the 510K process, whereas I get that device into market, but I make it better 2 years down the road to be competitive. I don't have to go back from zero again, which in Canada, of course, that's not possibly the case. So that's a substantive challenge, and that's why those government policymakers, regulators, need to be in our conferences and at our tables. And I absolutely promise with you, I've already set up with the minister, that the outcome of our meeting today and tomorrow will go directly to not one deputy minister, 4 deputy ministers, to look at here are the regulatory hurdles we need to think through and make better and streamline. Here are the procurement ones, which I'll speak to in a moment, and carry on from there. The last challenge is clearly procurement and adoption of devices. The best word that people came up to describe this, and it was described not once but probably 318 times, was, and it's ugly. We need to fix the ugly in the procurement process. And one of the things driving procurement, to be honest, is the financial models that drive healthcare systems. Right now we are in, and we will continue in Canada and many other countries to be in a publicly funded system. There is only so much tax dollars that's going to be available to fund healthcare. In Ontario right now, it's 46 cents on the dollar. If nothing changes in our healthcare system by 2020, it will be 76 cents on the dollar. Those additional cents on the dollar can only come from a few other big sectors. Guess what one of them is? Education. And that would be universities. So it's an interesting and it's a very, very challenging environment. If you have limited funds to spend on healthcare, and if we insist on continuing to deliver healthcare systems in very antiquated environments that were established in the 50s and 60s that aren't meeting the demands of our patients coming to us, then your only option as a procurement strategy is to focus on give me the cheapest, 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 cheapest. So cost seems to be the ultimate focus of our procurement strategies for developing or for adopting new devices. And what that means is the big companies maybe survive a little bit. The smaller companies can't possibly compete at the same level. And absolutely very limited evidence suggests that when we're looking, those procurement processes seem to be focusing exclusively on cost and not on long-term impact. So if there's a device that costs $50 more than the other three that I'm looking at in this procurement process, and nobody's looking at, but wait a second, that $50 is accomplished or recovered about 6 times over because it's so much more effective at streamlining and giving these physicians and health practitioners the information they need to keep people independent in their homes, particularly our elderly population who are growing and don't want to be, quite frankly, in emergency rooms and long-term care facilities, then the procurement process has to change. One of the things procurement has done in Canada, for those of you who may or may not be aware, is the group purchasing organization concept. So in order to get a better cost, let's have 54 hospitals join a group, and we negotiate not one hospital with the device company. We're bringing the power of the size of a much larger market with those 82 hospitals, and we can drive the price down because you're going to be able to sell more, and we'll both try to survive. One of the negative outcomes of that procurement strategy is this monopoly feeling. Monopolies tend not to create the best opportunities for innovation, and the last thing they do is support the innovation adoption of devices that really could change clinical practice and healthcare system service delivery in a substantive way by keeping people out of hospitals, keeping them well cared for, and monitoring and managed remotely in their communities. But if we don't invest in those devices to allow health practitioners to do that because of our procurement hurdles, then we're not going to have a thriving device industry, but more importantly, we are not going to have a healthcare system that can possibly meet the demands when it's going to cost the province, just this province, 76 cents on the dollar. So that procurement system is extremely important, and the word ugly needs to change to manageable, and then down the road, maybe not bad, and then we'll seek optimal when we become the global leaders. And I say that looking at my colleagues at this table and hope they'll help us get there. So what are the recommendations that we're suggesting and putting forward? We'd really like you to think about and dialogue and tell us tell us what we missed, tell us how we could make this better. But I think what I've already heard this morning, and I anticipate hearing this afternoon, that some of these recommendations are actually capturing what many of these panelists are telling us. Number one, for Canada in particular, it may not be the case with other countries, we need desperately a national strategy to enable the linkages and the partnerships between industry, government, health system stakeholders. That includes the research and development group, which are primarily housed in universities, those academic health science centers who are long and strong on clinical trials, and those decision makers in our ministries of health in our 10 provinces and 3 territories. We need to streamline our processes. No question, we can't be going through 28 regulatory hurdles and expect a medical device company to want to do that in this country. If they don't do that in this country, the other flip side of this is clinicians like myself and my physician colleagues, they don't even know what devices are out there because they never see them because Canada gets bypassed. So we can't even begin as clinicians to think about how do we transform our health system when we don't even know what the opportunities and possibilities are with new devices coming. One of our interviewees said to me, you know, Canada in many cases is 2 to 3 generations behind other countries on certain devices. That makes me nervous as a healthcare consumer, but also as a clinician that would never have the possibility to figure out how I could be better at delivering care to these families that I happen to work with. We absolutely need the open dialogue between key stakeholders to support innovation and change. I think today's event is a great way to start, and Ivey is going to be connecting with you after today and tomorrow, so just a fair warning that we're going to hopefully push and stimulate and drive that dialogue into some actionable outcomes. Recommendation number 2, we have got to figure out ways to create supportive environments and partnerships for the medical device industry to grow and thrive. A growing medical device industry means a much smarter, efficient, productive, and effective healthcare system, a much stronger global economy and competitiveness. We need to, and some of the suggestions we're making as to how to do that, transform our existing technology hubs into partnership networks. We are in a landmass, one of the largest land masses in the world. We have a relatively small population. Canada is very good at partnerships. I'm suggesting that this is a great focus for partnership networks to achieve some of these recommendations. We need to coordinate our R&D with universities and the device industry and make sure the clinicians are at the table and are helping with the balance between the push and the pull we've heard about this morning. We need to create innovation labs for proof of concept testing, and I would suggest those might best be situated right in the clinical practice settings. Just like the neonatal intensive care units, where I take my engineering students and colleagues along with my business students and have the nurses work very closely with them to help in making sure that what we're designing and developing in these new technologies are actually a strong fit for what the needs of these populations might be. Absolutely need a single point of industry to access networks. So the next time the automotive company says, who do I speak to in the healthcare system? I actually have an answer for them. We need to leverage health technology assessment expertise we have in this country and make it something that globally people are aware of, countries are aware of, and seek out on a regular basis. And we need to capitalize on our clinical trial and our health technology partnerships to attract the medical device industry to Canada and hopefully go back to having a nice balance of the large companies, the small companies that are coming up with the pipeline of new ideas and technologies and on and so forth. Next recommendation is we've got to fix the ugly in the procurement process, accelerate the ability of medical device companies to test and launch those new technologies in the Canadian market. In doing that, we have to create an accountability in our procurement systems. We've got to go back to these group purchasing organizations and reframe the focus not just on cost, but how do these new devices get us where we need to go on delivering quality of patient care and doing so to meet the capacity that we're going to need as we go forward with an aging population and rising rates of chronic illness. We've got to replace monopolies with collaborative procurement practice to support innovation adoption. And we've had a very long and strong theme in our panels this morning about we've got to get to collaboration. What do I mean by collaboration? I don't simply mean that we have to be able to talk to each other. The nurses talk to the engineers. What I mean by collaboration is real collaboration. I learn the language of the engineers as a nurse. And just as importantly, the engineers learn the language and the issues and the challenges I face every day as the nurse or the physician. Understand the language, the agenda, the drivers of the health sector industry partner. You can't expect a company to say, I've got a great idea, just write the check for $2.3 million and I'll have that device to you in, depending on how many students I get in my course, maybe a couple of semesters. Got to understand the competing agendas we are all working within. My agenda as a health professional is quite different than my agenda as a researcher, which is different again from that policymaker. And all of us tend to speak different languages. You've got to learn the language. I think I have learned engineering, Neil. I've worked hard at that. I'm actually trying to learn computer science. And I've commercialized software at the same time, but learning that language has been one of my most challenging. Physicians, I've pretty much nailed that one. I've spent 1,000 years working with them. But I think our students in business schools have many languages to learn. And people say, Anne, you sound a little like businessy in your language. I think that business language has soaked in through my skin because I tend to speak business language now too. It's important to create a collaborative environment so that everybody knows what everyone needs to achieve, because collaborative partnerships mean everybody wins. Not one or the other, but all of the partners at the table. If we can accomplish that, then we'll establish a procurement best practice that supports innovation adoption. And our last recommendation, regulatory. There is no reason, in my opinion, that we need to go through 23, 25, 26, whatever it is, regulatory hurdles to get a medical device, into a clinical practice setting, taking 5 years to do so when the longevity of that particular device may only be 18 months. If we can't fix regulatory, then companies, and I don't blame them, aren't going to look at the Canadian healthcare system as a viable place to launch that device, and then our healthcare system loses out, and more importantly, our patient care opportunities and quality of care also loses out. We need to establish, and I know this is lofty as well, world leadership in regulatory speed and efficiency so that we become a very attractive place for the medical device sector to do business. We need a single point of access with very streamlined regulatory processes that are harmonized across jurisdictions, and we need establish very clear and transparent processes for the devices of the future, which are going to mean embedded software for collecting and analyzing and reporting information, which touches privacy laws, device regulation, and of course, pharma regulation, because these devices it's no longer one size fits all. These combination devices are clearly what healthcare systems need to transform our care, get it out of hospitals, which are wildly expensive, and into communities. So just to close, I believe, and Ivey Center and our colleagues believe, that medical devices hold the key, one of the very important keys to global competitiveness in the health sector, but also a really important key to the health of our population. It's a very important sector for innovation and building health system capacity. I believe Canada has the knowledge, it has the resources, we need to create the infrastructure, and we need to strive to become a global medical devices hub. And I thank you all very much for coming to this conference and helping us refine these ideas, push some of these opportunities into marketplaces, and collaborate where we need to collaborate to drive forward. Thank you.